What's up everyone, Dan Vega here, Spring Developer Advocate at VMware. Today I want to take a look at Nuxt GraphQL Client. So I've been doing a lot of videos. I'm a big fan of GraphQL, especially on the server side with Spring for GraphQL. But I've been getting a lot of questions like, hey, what about the front end? We have this great GraphQL API. What are some ways that we can call it from the front end? Now, I'm a huge Vue fan. I'm a big Nuxt fan. So putting these two together was an easy choice for me. So I want to take a look at one of the modules out there for Nuxt that allows you to talk to a GraphQL API. Now, of course, I'm going to build this GraphQL API in Spring today. If you want to skip that part, that's fine. There'll be some timestamps in the description below if you want to just jump to the Nuxt part. But this could be in any GraphQL API, right? So the Nuxt part is talking to any GraphQL API. You configure that in your application. So here's Nuxt GraphQL Client. You can go through and check this out. Zero configuration, full TypeScript support, multiple client support. So if you want to talk to a few different GraphQL APIs, that's great. Hot module reload for GraphQL documents. This is really important. As you're like starting to type out your queries, you'll put your queries in a folder, in a directory, in a file like called GraphQL. And as you change those, you'll get hot module replacement, which is nice because basically there's generated code from those queries, and that happens automatically for you. That folder is getting watched. And then a minimal GraphQL client plus TypeScript code generation. Again, this is the code generation part that happens. So this is really exciting. You can see if you go through the getting started documentation, it's pretty easy to follow. Like, how do I get started? The configuration is the big thing. You want to look through the different configuration options. There's a lot, as would be expected. You're trying to hook up to an API. There needs to be a way to configure a lot of things. So I think what we'll do, we'll head over to IntelliJ. I have a Spring project open based on a previous tutorial because we got a bunch of data in the application. This will give us some data to serve up from the application or from the API, and then we can build out the API side. We'll come back, we'll create a new project using Nuxt. We'll add in the Nuxt GraphQL client. I'll also add in Nuxt UI. It helps us kind of just build out a table real quickly. It's a really nice project. So we'll do that. And this side of things will be pretty quick. So let's do it. Let's jump over to the Spring side and create the API that we're going to consume from Nuxt. All right. So if you weren't with me in a previous tutorial where we read in some data, so we have some JSON data here. These are a bunch of blog posts from my personal blog. Then I will leave a link to that video in the description below, or maybe up here somewhere in the video. You can click on it. But that will just kind of give you a baseline of how to get data into the application. So I have this JSON file with 100 posts. I read it in, I persist it off to a database. In this case, we had a regular REST controller just to like view all of the data if we wanted to. So what I'm going to do is turn this into a GraphQL API. So how do we do that? So we first start in the pom.xml. We're going to add some bits to this, some dependencies. So we're going to start with a new dependency, Spring Boot Starter GraphQL, and that is going to bring that in. The other thing we need is the extended scalar support. This comes from the GraphQL Java world. Oh, wow, I feel like it's listening to me. That was very good, a little bit too good, Copilot. Yes, so we need the extended scalar support so that we can have a date type in a date scalar type. From there, we have Spring Boot Starter Data JDBC. That's good. We have an H2 database. That's good. I think that's all we need. If we're going to write some tests, then we would need something like Spring Boot, Spring GraphQL test. Yes, just in case we get there. And that's that. Okay, I'm going to reload those changes in Maven. That gives us the support that we need. Now, in the resources folder, this is done for you automatically if you go to start.spring.io and pick Spring for GraphQL. But since we're adding the bits in, we'll need to create a GraphQL folder, and we'll need to go ahead and create a schema. So I'm going to say, hey, give me a schema.graphqls, and this is the basis for our schema in GraphQL. So let's start with the post. So we need an object type for post, and post is going to have an ID, which is an type ID. We'll have title. We'll have slug. We will have date, which is going to be of type date. We'll come back to that in a second. Time to read, which is going to be of type int, and tags is just going to be a string. So now we need this date. We're going to create a custom scalar type. So we'll say scalar date. Now we need to pull this in. How do we do this in GraphQL, Spring for GraphQL? I've done this a bunch of times, but here we can just create a new package. I'm going to call this GraphQL. I'm going to say, I want to create a new Java class. We'll call this GraphQL. Why can't I type today? GraphQL config. And in here, this is going to be a configuration class, and we need to do a couple things here. So let me get a logger. That's good. And now what I need to do is create a new bean, and this will kind of set up our custom scalar. So this is going to be a runtime wiring configurer. We'll call this runtime wiring configurer, and we're going to return the wiring builder. Yep, there you go. Thank you, Copilot. And we're going to get one of the extended scalars in there. So there's a bunch in here. So date, date time, JSON, URL, etc. You see all of them in there. I only need the date, so I'm going to pull that in. Now, one thing I want to do while I'm in here as well is I want to turn on the new inspection report in Spring for GraphQL. So Spring GraphQL in schema introspection enabled equals true. So if I do that, now what I can do is set up a way for us to kind of log this report. And this report is really nice because it's going to give us some insight into everything that's kind of going on with our schema. And if there's problems, then it'll let us know. So I'm going to basically just log this out to the console. There are other things that you can do with it, but this is fine for my local development. Okay, so now I've got this configuration set up. I've got this set up. I probably need a couple of queries, right? So I need to say, yep, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Let's rename those though. I want to say find, let's call this find all posts. And let's call this find post by ID. Okay, that takes an ID as an argument, which cannot be null, and returns a post. Okay, so far looking really good here. So I've got my schema set up. Now I need to map these queries to a controller somewhere. So I have a post controller. This is no longer going to be a REST controller. This is just going to be a controller. And then we need to map this to the field in our schema. Is it called find all or find all posts? Find all posts. So we want to use the same name. And the reason we want to do that is we could come in here and define a schema mapping and say type name equals query. The field name is find all. I think we called it find all. Oh, find all posts, right? We could do this, but I want to cut down and be a little bit less verbose here. So I can just say at query mapping, and if this is the same, then that will align with the field in our schema. So cool. One down, one to go. We can say again at query mapping, and we can say this is going to return a post. This is not a long, this is actually a string, right? And then what we can do is we can map this to the GraphQL argument using the @argument annotation. So cool. So that should map everything to our GraphQL schema. So before we go to the front end, let's just verify that we've done everything correctly. I also want to enable, so spring.graphql.graphical enabled equals true. So now if we go ahead and run our application, hopefully everything works. And if it does, we can go over to the browser and check out the schema. So I did. Let's go back over here and go to localhost 8080/graphical. And I think this will allow us to run this query, and yes, so we get all of the posts in our system, which is 100. This is starting to work out. So now this is the query that we can take to the front end and basically create an application to call our backend API to get all the posts and display them in some kind of UI. All right, so before we can go ahead and add Nuxt GraphQL client module to a Nuxt application, we need a Nuxt application. So let's go ahead and create a quick and simple one. So I'm going to use npx. I'm going to use nuxi at latest, and I'm going to say init, and the name of the project is just going to be GraphQL demo. So with that, we should go ahead and ask us a couple of questions. I'm going to just use npm. It's going to install the dependencies, and we should be off and running pretty quickly here. Great. So now we can go ahead and cd into GraphQL demo. And if we wanted to, we could run the application from there. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio Code. Now, again, I think in the final demo code, I'll have it kind of packaged together with the Spring app so people can just download a single project. But if you're not using Spring for the backend, then just do what I'm doing here by creating a simple Nuxt application. So we have our Nuxt app. What we need to do is we need to add the GraphQL client to our Nuxt application. So how do we do that? Let's go back to the terminal and actually pop over to the browser. And if we go to the quick start documentation, we can start by npm installing the Nuxt GraphQL client. So I'm going to do that here in my application. If everything works okay, we should be all right. Cool, looks good. Now we need to declare that module. So I'm going to go into my Nuxt config, and I'm going to go ahead and declare that module. So if you're new to Nuxt, this is a way to basically, you've installed a module, now you want to go ahead and use it in Nuxt. So I want to use the Nuxt GraphQL client. Then you'll need to go through here and configure some things. So in this case, we want to set up a runtime config. So if I go back over here and I say runtime config, here's the GQL host. Ours is going to actually be at, ours is going to be at localhost 8080/GraphQL, and that should be good. All right, so the next thing I need to do is I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to call this, let's just call this queries. And inside of queries, this is where all my GraphQL queries, mutations, subscriptions would go. I'm going to create a new file, and we'll call this findallposts.graphql. All right, and I'm going to paste in that find all posts that we used from before. So this is our query. This is what we want to use. Here's the cool thing. Let's go ahead and run. We're not going to do anything with it yet. I just want to show you something. If I run npm run dev, we want to make sure everything is working. Looks to be that way. If I go in here and go into the Nuxt folder now, you'll see a GQL folder. And if we go into there, you'll see that it's created a new GQL find all posts. So this is exactly what we can use now in some type of view to go ahead and call find all posts. So this is nice. This code generation that's happening behind the scenes. You also get all the types that you may need as well. So this is really great. And again, anytime you change something in that queries folder, you get hot module replacement. A really, really nice feature. So with that, I want to do something in my Nuxt app. I want to display all of those queries. So let's start with just making it work. Then we'll make it look pretty by bringing in something like Nuxt UI. So I'm going to say script setup here, and I want to get all the posts. So how do I do that? I want to say const posts is equal to, and I want to await, and I want to use that GQL find posts. So as I start typing, GQL find all posts. Wow, that was so easy to do. So let me just log that out and see if we can't get this working. So I'm going to go ahead and we have some hot module replacement there. I'm just going to clear this out for my own sake. Let's say npm run dev. And if everything's working, we should be able to go to localhost 3000 and inspect this. Did we not save that? Oh no, we're still getting the Nuxt welcome, which is fine. But here I want to go ahead and, okay, cool. So this is something that is going to come up. I'm glad it did. So we see that we have access to localhost 8080 from origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by CORS policy. This is okay. This is going to happen. How do we fix this on the GraphQL side? So what we want to do is I want to enable a couple things here. GraphQL CORS allowed methods. I'm just going to allow all for right now locally. Again, I don't think this is a big deal. The bigger thing is you want to allow specific origins. So I'm going to say Spring GraphQL CORS allowed origins, and I'm going to set that localhost 3000 is allowed to access that. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And let's go back to the browser, reload our application, and boom, we are able to hit our API, and we see that we're getting all 100 posts. Okay, so far so good. Now we just need a nice way to display these. So I'm a big fan of Nuxt UI. This allows me to just kind of display some information on a page without having to worry about how to tinker with all the UI stuff. So Nuxt UI built with headless UI and Tailwind CSS, two of my favorite projects. And this will allow us to just get up and running really quickly. So how do I install it? I go over to here and I'm going to say npm install-d Nuxt HQ UI. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop this application here. I'm going to run that, and that will give us all of the, we don't need to do any more configuring from here. That'll give us everything we need. And if you want to go ahead and configure it further, you can, but you don't need to. So one of the things you get out of this is a data table, and that's all I want. I just want to display some data in a table, and I don't want to have to mess with writing all of this myself. So this is going to be really easy thanks to Nuxt UI. Okay, so let me get rid of this. I'm going to start with maybe just a main class, and we'll say this is a container, and I want to set some margin here, and then I'm going to use the U table. So U table, and then we need to pass in some rows. And what are the rows? The rows are going to be what it comes back from posts. Now posts is going to, remember, return the data in like a data structure that has find all in it. So let's say find all posts. And I think that should give us everything we need. So let's head back over to the browser. Did we not restart? Let's do that. So we're going to say npm run dev. All right. Did we mess something up? Oh, I know what we did. So we forgot to include this in our Nuxt config. So if we don't declare that module that we installed, then we can't use it. So let's just declare it. So we want to say Nuxt, actually at Nuxt HQ /UI. So that's it. Now if we go ahead and let's restart. All right, that is what we were looking for. So now all of our data is in, it should be in a, I don't know why we're not getting that margin. Let's try and refresh again. Let's see if we go back to app.view. That would help. We need a class. So now we're getting that margin. That's what I was looking for. And then we're displaying all 100 records in a table. So we have things like ID, title, slug, our date, our time to read, and our tags in a comma separated value. Cool. So that, I think, is the extent of the tutorial. I just wanted to go through Nuxt GraphQL client. Very easy to install into a Nuxt application. Very easy to use. Easier than most other modules I've had to deal with. You just provide a little configuration and you're off and running, but there's a lot of configuration if you need to If you have a setup where it just doesn't work out of the box, maybe you need to configure some things. Maybe you want to tell it how to do code generation, etc. So there's a lot of configuration there. And I really enjoy this because I can just write a query and I'm off and running. I can use it in a view and a layout, whatever I need it. So fun times here with Nuxt GraphQL Client, and Nuxt UI was able to just spit everything out and do a table for us, and we didn't have to do that. That's something that I appreciate. So cool. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, we're probably going to do another one on Apollo using the same kind of setup. But if you enjoy videos like this, do me a favor and leave me a comment below. If you learned something new today, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding, friends.